Welcome back, friends. Welcome back to another edition of everybody's favorite solutions-based podcast. That is Solutions Watch. I'm James Corbett of the Corbett Report here in April of 2025. And for this week's solutions-based idea, we're going to take our cue from a recent edition of the Questions for Corbett podcast, which I certainly hope you have seen by now. But if not, here's a good chance for you to check it out. It's called What Happened to the Anti-Establishment? And that was a very good Questions for Corbett because it was a seemingly simple question that led to a very interesting and profound answer. And if you did see that, or now that you have paused this podcast and gone and listened to that, you will know that in that edition of Questions for Corbett, I was addressing specifically the idea of not having a language to identify a certain phenomenon and how that can intellectually hobble us from even understanding what is happening. And you'll see, we use the explanation, for example, just the fact that there are no words to describe the decades of the 2000s and 2010s. There was no handy, set, culturally agreed upon phrase for those decades, meant that the concept of decades started to erode in the cultural memory. And as a consequence of that, people started to identify more by generations than decades, and that has had social ramifications that reverberate to this very day and have really divided people along generational lines more strongly than they were before. And as you will also see from that exploration, of course, I talked about the concept of the establishment, or the man, and not having a culturally agreed upon term for that now, so that now everything has become culture war. It has all become a left-right divide, and are you woke or are you MAGA, or whatever the local equivalent of those terms are in your language, have become the defining way in which we understand and organize our culture. Taking that observation, that insight, I think we can extract some very, very profound consequences of that. For example, you saw at the end of that Questions for Corbett, I proposed we need another the man. We need some sort of phrase to identify the shared oligarchical enemy that sits at the top of this power structure that is not your neighbor who voted the wrong way in the last meaningless slave voting selection. No, it is the oligarchs at the top of the system who are the real enemies, and we need some phrase, some thing to identify and understand that, a cultural shorthand for that so that we can better understand it. But of course, it isn't just that issue which this issue of naming affects. It's any number of issues. And here's another incredibly important insight that falls out of that previous insight, namely the they, them, those, the man, the establishment, the oligarchs, the powers that shouldn't be, whatever you call them, they know about the power of words and the power of having control of the language so that people start to identify certain words with certain pre-planned agenda ideas and items. So let me say something that will be completely transgressive, will sound incredibly, oh my God, I can't believe James would say such a thing and mean it. But here it goes. I am a sustainable free trade globalist. What? James, I thought those are the exact things that you're against. Well, of course, it all depends on what ways you are using those words, what they actually denote, let alone connote, and how they are used in what context. And this is a point that hopefully long-term Corbett Reporteers in the audience will know by now, but if not, let's refresh our memory with a video that I put out the better part of a decade ago now on I am a sustainable free trade globalist. One of the most effective things that the powers that shouldn't be have ever done is to hijack our language, to lay stake to certain words and phrases, and thereby to lay stake to entire ideas, concepts, territory of the mind. What do I mean by that? Well, let's take a phrase like free trade. If you were to come out today and say, I'm a proponent of free trade, people will automatically assume that what you are saying is, I'm for NAFTA, I'm for the TPP, I'm for the World Trade Organization. When in reality, those ideas, those concepts, those bodies and organizations and deals are the exact opposite of free trade. They are managed trade, restricted trade, controlled trade. That's when the gangsters who claim monopoly over geographical territories get together and say, okay, I'll give you a little bit of this if you give me a little bit of that. They're taking the pie and dividing it up and saying, I'll let you have a little bit of my cherry pie, but I want some of that apple pie. It's the exact opposite of what is meant in plain language by free trade, as in free people freely transacting and interacting across whatever lines on whatever imaginary map in whatever way they feel is best, without a third party, usually the banksters and their cronies, coming in to intervene in that transaction. That is free trade, but we can't even talk about that concept. We don't even have a term for it, because the term for it, free trade, has been co-opted into this North American Free Trade Agreement and the Trans-Pacific Partnership and all of that. They have hijacked that language. Here's another example: globalism. Now that's an interesting example. In many ways, I regret that the label that I have used, that I have applied to the enemies of freedom, is globalist, because it is true in a sense. There is a globalist ideology that believes that there should be a one world government that controls all interactions between all people and sees everything, knows everything, controls everything, and of course, by the way, in parentheses, run by, the banksters and their political cronies. What are you going to do? Now, that is certainly one form of globalism, but it is not the only form of globalism. What is globalism? It is the idea that, again, free people should be able to freely interact and transact with any people across whatever imaginary lines on whatever map, that we are free human beings, and that I don't need a special, let this person go by from the queen in order to cross an imaginary line on a map. All of the things that we now, unfortunately, take so much for granted that we don't even pause to think about them, but that are truly affronts to freedom. So, again, the idea, the word, the concept of a free human being has been, I'm a globalist. I'm not the loyal subject of Queen Elizabeth, but again, the idea, I can't go out and say I'm a globalist because people will not understand what I mean by that. Do you understand the insidious nature of this? Let's take one more example. Sustainability. Of course, when you say this, again, immediately, what do people think of? It is Agenda 21. It's the United Nations. It's, hey, we'll take our international body and we'll claim this section of the globe and we'll use it for our purposes and we'll call it sustainability. Of course, I mean, who isn't against that other than the cronies who get to profit directly from that? But what about the idea of local resilience, localism, the idea of, well, we can do it ourselves, we can grow things, we can trade amongst each other and profit amongst each other locally, and we can protect the environment because we don't want, to live on a dung heap. That is sustainability, isn't it? But again, that idea, that word sustainability has been co-opted and has come to mean part of this UN Agenda 2030, whatever nonsense. Again, time after time after time, real ideas, real concepts, real possibilities for freedom are co-opted because the language itself to describe those concepts has been co-opted. It's a very insidious process. It's, in some ways, the most fundamental way that we are controlled. We are controlled through our language. Students of Eric Blair will be well aware of this. Perhaps students of Ludwig Wittgenstein, if there are any philosophers in the crowd. The limits of our language are the limits of our reality. And if you control our language, you control reality itself. Maybe that's what Karl Rove was talking about in that infamous quotation. Link in the show notes if you don't know what I'm talking about. So, I think this is a pretty important concept. It's something that I've talked about a number of times over the years. I will definitely be doing more work on this, but I'm interested in hearing your take on this. Specifically, I've given a few examples: sustainability and globalism and free trade. What are some other words or phrases that have been hijacked by the powers that shouldn't be to serve their own ends, to divert us from the path of true freedom? I'm very interested to hear what you guys come up with. I think this is something that we need to explore in much greater detail, so I'm looking forward to doing that with you. James Corbett, CorbettReport.com. Now, as I say, longtime Corbett Reporteers will hopefully be familiar with that video, but you might have forgotten about it in the intervening, 7, 8 years now? However long it's been. It was put out in 2017 originally, so it's been a while since I made that point, but I think the point still stands to this very day, and I think that all of those words have been hijacked and used in a certain type of psychological operation to essentially ensnare the minds of the public, who then start using those words in certain ways. Certain words become toxic. You can't even talk about the idea of sustainability without talking about it in the UN context. And as if the Sustainable Development Goals are what that phrase, what that word actually signifies. Well, maybe it does in the mind of the general public now, but that is because of a coordinated and concerted and decades-long propaganda campaign that has seen however many billions of dollars, as well as international time and energy and investment and legislation and school indoctrination that have gone into getting people indoctrinated into the system of sustainability and free trade and globalism and all of these terms and what they mean. All right, as I say, I think the they, them, those, the powers that shouldn't be, have used this power to control words, control language, and thereby control people's thoughts. What is even thinkable? If you don't have a word for a thing, does that thing even exist? And in what way can you identify it or talk about it meaningfully? So it is important to call things by their right name. If you can accurately identify, label, and name something, you have gone some way towards actually putting your finger on that thing and being able to do something about that thing. So it is probably a power that we should be using ourselves, rather than letting the powers that shouldn't be do it to us. Anyway, I was very gratified to see that on that edition of the podcast, there were quite a few responses taking me up on my offer of, hey, what other words can you see that have been used in similar ways, distorted in similar ways? For example, Wide Awake, you left this comment talking about how anarchy does not equal chaos, although we have been programmed to think it does. Egalitarianism does not equal destroy social norm in region. Social justice does not equal blah, blah, blah. There's skepticism. That's a point that I've made before in a previous podcast on reclaiming skepticism. Yes, skepticism is a good thing, but the Michael Shermers of the world certainly aren't practicing that when they talk, for example, about JFK or anything else controversial. M. Claire notes how supernatural language saturates our daily communication: soul, spirit, hope, faith, belief, divine, miraculous. These magic words can be played like a trump card to stop communication. We shall not question a person's right to believe in fairy tales. Why not? Science has become a magic word. Science tells us the truth. Yes, of course. We've all seen over the past few years, trust the science is the new religion. And it is the word science has definitely been weaponized in a similar manner. More magic words: denier, conspiracy theorists, energy that can be either dirty or clean, green, democracy, vote, left versus right. W. Haugen talks about Reform Act of anything, Modernization Act of anything, Patriot Act. Of course, yes, the Patriot Act. Can anyone remember what the acronym stands for right now? It's PATRIOT, but how did they twist the language to make it Patriot as the acronym? Anyway, of course, that kind of nonsense goes on all the time. But why do they do that? Why do they go into these big linguistic verbal acrobatics to come up with the right acronym so they can have a handy thing to call it the Patriot Act? Of course, so that they can start to manipulate people's minds and influence the conversation. Ryan from The Last American Vagabond was here contributing in this comment section. There was a lot of other ones: public education versus private education, democracy, terrorism, the internet, think tanks, NGOs. All of these words are being deployed in certain ways, in certain contexts, to make you think and go along certain lines, and think along certain agendas. So again, how can we take this power back into our own hands? Well, this is something that I have played with before, and I have invited people to talk about before. For example, I have just put out a podcast on algocracy, which I know will be a new word to most people. 99% of people in the public will never have heard that word and may be able to reason it out. Oh, algorithm? Okay, rule by algorithm. But it's a a way of reframing and reshaping people and reorienting people towards understanding a phenomenon that is taking place, the rule by algorithm that is already here and is only going to accelerate from here. Being able to identify that is a key and important part of being able to do something about that. So that is, in some ways, part of my contribution, is putting words like that out there to get people to start to understand and see and identify certain problems as they are coming along. How else can we use naming and names and words to help people in the general public to see things from a different perspective? Well, as you can imagine, I get emails on this very subject all the time. For example, here's one that I received very recently from Ignatius, who writes, "Hi, James. I had a brainwave. Seeing the enormous impact Elon Musk is having in politics and other areas he positions himself, the time has come to immortalize him in a, you might call it, discreet way. I propose to change the spelling of masquerade to muscarade. It's a word that sort of honors how he is achieving things, and seeing he is now the efficiency guru in the US government, it is a more efficient way to spell the word." All right, okay, well, thank you for that contribution, Ignatius, and if anyone out there wants to start spelling it masquerade, go for it. I don't personally use the word masquerade very much in my daily life, so I'm not sure this will catch on, but if it does, great. And similarly, if people have other pet words like this that they think might, hey, I think that's an idea, please leave them in the comments section of today's Solutions Watch, and I'm sure people will be interested in hearing about them and bandying ideas back and forth. Having said all of this, I think this is an important thing. Genuinely, I think it is important. And you will note, for example, I use certain words and phrases all the time, like powers that shouldn't be, which is a little bit of a pattern interrupt because everyone has heard powers that be, which is just that kind of vague phrase. Powers that shouldn't be puts a different emphasis on it that hopefully stops people in their tracks when they're thinking about it. So, as I say, I think this is a good and important tool to have in our tool belt. But, and this is where the but comes in, I think we also have to be careful about the concept of word ninnying, as in just playing around with words or policing other people's words. Oh, you said that word. Oh no, that's not how we're going to win this fight against the New World Order. You have to use this other word to win the fight. It can become a bit silly at times if people take it too far. And what do I mean by that? Well, there was an interesting and good editorial that was up recently on Off Guardian by Todd Hayen. Who are the elite? Good question. And he writes, people are always correcting me when I use the term elite to describe that group of people, or maybe lizards, who are calling the shots and who created the agenda and want the rest of us, useless eaters, either under their thumb or dead. The people who correct me claim these people, or lizards, are not elite, which falsely implies better, advanced, or special. They don't want to give these people, or lizards, any credit they do not deserve. I get it. The clear and indisputable official definition of elite is a group of class of persons considered to be superior to others because of their intelligence, social standing, or wealth. But who is doing the considering? Them or us, the non-elite? However, it's an easy word to use to describe a group, just like sheep and shrew are easy to use. It's not necessarily wholly accurate, but everyone knows what I am referring to when I use these terms. I get the same sort of criticism when I use the phrase powers that be. Many people want me to use the more awkward expression, powers that shouldn't be. Yes, more accurate, but more awkward. And then he goes on to talk about the elite, quote unquote. And yes, sure, when we talk about the elite, presumably, people in my audience would be using it in the sneer quotes, the elite, as in they're not really elite. But I hear this too, which is interesting because I have made the conscious decision since Susan, my editor, years ago suggested the word elitist instead of elite. And I thought, oh, that's perfect because yes, everyone knows elites, the elites. Well, this is calling them the elitists, as in they think themselves better than everyone else, although elitist is a negative. It has a negative connotation. Oh, he's elitist. He's a snob. Well, it has that negative connotation, which I like. So I usually try to use the word elitists rather than elites. But still, people will try to word police me on that. Oh, you shouldn't use that word. It gives them too much credit, etc., etc. Okay, I get it. And as Todd Hayen writes here, yeah, True. Okay, it would be more accurate not to use that word. But everyone knows what that word means, and it's just a way of communicating. So, yes, I do think it is important to have accurate terminology for describing things and for naming things in the right way. And for sometimes, like me, I do go with powers that shouldn't be. I know it is awkward, but actually it flows just as easily for me, maybe even easier for me now that I've been using it for so many years, than powers that be. I don't think I could even say that anymore. I always say powers that shouldn't be. But that's just my preference. And I'm not going to stop somebody. Oh, actually, you shouldn't say that. You should say... I think word ninnying can get out of control. But having said that, I think there is something here. I think words truly do have an important effect on shaping our minds, and that's precisely why so much of the propaganda is centered around trying to shape and control and otherwise mold our language into something that is more amenable to what the powers that shouldn't be want it to be. So what can we do to take that power back into our hands? How can we start naming and identifying certain things that maybe we're not supposed to see? Algocracy. I'm gratified to note that technocracy has started to become common parlance now, at least in the alternative media world, certainly, and hopefully in the broader world generally. People are starting to think in terms of technocracy. Well, that is an absolute achievement, and thanks to the work of people like Patrick Wood, who have been ringing the alarm bell on that for a very long time, with very important work on that subject. And that is to the good, because now people can start to see and identify, oh, he's a technocrat. I understand what's going on. So it is a valuable thing. This is where I'm going to call on the Corbett Report community. Just like in the I am a sustainable free trade globalist conversation there from several years ago, how about today? What are the words that are being used to spin webs around us today? And more importantly, what words can we use to break those patterns, to get people to see the world in a different way? I put this on the table for the Corbett Reporters out there to mull and chew over. And once you do, please leave your contributions in the comment section at corbettreport.com. I'm sure we will all be interested and edified by that discussion that's about to take place. Having said that, that's this week's idea for Solutions Watch. Thank you for investing your time and attention in the Corbett Report, and I'm looking forward to talking to you again in the very near future.